Hi there, Chris Younger with another sales thought of the day. Today's sales thought, we're going to talk about how to use reciprocity bias to help us in sales. Now, reciprocity bias is another one of the cognitive biases, and if you remember, we learned about cognitive bias in last week's video, how to use cognitive biases in sales. Let's start with first defining what reciprocity bias actually is. Reciprocity bias is when you provide someone a favor, a small gift, some type of a concession, and then they in turn have this strong sense of obligation to pay you back. Or as Brain Tracy puts it, if you do something nice for me, I'll do something nice for you. However, it does work both ways, so that quote could be, hey, you do something rotten to me, and I'm going to do something rotten to you. Now, one of the powers of reciprocity lies in the fact that it's pervasive and ambiguous throughout the world. You can find it in every single culture. It's even been credited with helping develop a system in the world of indebtedness that has actually helped advance society throughout history. Now, it's this feeling of indebtedness that's made such a huge difference in society's evolution because it meant that you could give away food, skills, ideas without the feeling of giving things away and you'll never get anything in return. After all, when it comes to reciprocity, one party has to start the whole string of reciprocity. And because our brains, they just don't like to be in debt, the person who started the giving doesn't have to be in fear that their actions won't ever be returned. For an example, let's go back to prehistoric times and let's pretend that you're a caveman. You know how to hunt, so that means you can teach the guy in the cave down the street how to hunt as well. And then, following the rule of reciprocity, he'll teach you in turn how to make a loincloth out of a saber-toothed tiger's pelt. Over time, this concept of sharing ideas and skills catches on and it grows exponentially. And then eventually it becomes something that is in every society throughout the world. There are two types of reciprocation. One's going to be physical and the other one's going to be emotional. Now, the physical one would be an example of your neighbor sees you coming home with a car full of groceries and he offers to help you out and he takes a couple bags in. And then in turn, a couple days later, he asks you to borrow that power saw, the one that you never let anybody touch, let alone even borrow. And for some reason, you go ahead and say yes. Well, that's the law of reciprocation right there. It's reciprocation bias. And the second type of reciprocation would be emotional. Now, emotional reciprocation, an example of that would be quite simply, I thank you for something, and you say you're welcome. It's just kind of known that that's the exchange there. Or you do me a favor by maybe picking up lunch. Well, the next time we're out to lunch, I'll pick up lunch because it's my turn. That's fair. That's how our society works. We like to make things even. Next, let's talk about how to use reciprocity laws in sales. Now, at its most basic level, the law of reciprocity says that because I do you a favor, that you'll do me a favor. So most likely our hope is that you will comply and agree to purchase something. However, while this rule may seem straightforward and simple, it's a little bit more complicated. To understand what I mean a little bit better, let's turn to one of my favorite studies that illustrates the power of this bias and how it can help us so much in sales. This famous restaurant study posed the question, will the amount of a tip increase if the server presents a small gift, and in this case a mint, to everybody at the table when they bring the check? Well, here's what they found out. When the server came back and presented the bill and gave each of the people at the table 1 mint, tips went up 3%. Nominal gain, you say. However, when the server came back and offered 2 mints to everybody at the table, tips went up a whopping 14%. Finally, though, get this. If the server offers them 1 mint, but then stops, turns on a dime, looks back at the table, walks back over and says, for you fine people, let me go ahead and give you another mint. Tips went up 23%. I really love how this restaurant study illustrates the 3 key elements or the 3 rules that need to be followed to make the reciprocity bias work for you. Let's go through the rules. Rule number 1. You or somebody needs to start the giving. Number 2, the gift needs to be unexpected. 3, It needs to be personalized. The gift needs to be personalized. Now let's run back through that restaurant study and see what the server did and if they hit all three of these rules, and it'll show us how they increased that tip by 23%. Rule number one, the server offered the first gift with the bill. They went ahead and gave that first mint with the bill. Rule number two, an unexpected gift. Now, when they brought the first mint, that's kind of expected. It only got a 3% increase, right? However, when they offered that second one, that's a little more unexpected. So that became the unexpected in fulfilling rule number two. And then kind of going along with that, rule number three, which is make it personalized, the fact they stopped, turned around and came back and said, for you fine folks, here's a second mint. That personalized it. That kind of sealed it. So those were the three elements that helped make an extra 23% tip. Another way the reciprocity law helps you in sales is recovering if you end up making a bad first impression. If you remember back on our video on car salesmen's meet and greet, we talked about liking. And we talked about how liking was important because that was one of the things that helped create a favorable impression. Now, liking is also one of the biases we discussed in last week's video, how to use cognitive bias to help us in sales. And remember that liking bias can actually lead to someone else making judgments about our other traits and deciding that we must be good in all of our traits because they liked us from the first impression. Now, there's an opposite end of the liking bias, and it's disliking bias. And that just means if you make a poor first impression, what the person will do that's met you is they'll go ahead and make an assumption that your entire character must be bad just because of this bad first impression. Well, here's some good news. The reciprocity rule can save you. What do I mean? Well, let's use a car salesperson coming back late from lunch to an appointment as our example. The salesperson got caught in traffic, so they're on their way back from lunch. However, they've got a guest that's been waiting for them for a little while, and when the salesperson gets to the dealership, the guest's noticeably irritated from having to wait. So what do you do as the salesperson? Obviously, you're going to apologize. And then what you're going to do is you're going to give them a free car wash voucher from one of those quick assembly line style type of car wash places that does a good job inside and out. And then you're going to just state this. Folks, I'm so sorry that I got stuck in traffic and I came back and held you up and made you have to wait. Let me do this. Let me give you a free car wash voucher that's going to go ahead and clean your vehicle inside and out. Hopefully this will make up for a little bit of the time that I delayed you on. And also, the nice thing about it is it's going to make your vehicle look great after one of those fun weekends of off-roading and mudding that I know you guys said you like to do. Upon giving the guest the voucher, you notice that their body language and you can hear in their tone of voice that they're positive now and that the reciprocity rule has helped save your first impression. The car wash voucher worked because it followed all three steps or rules to making the reciprocity bias work for you. Number one, the salesperson offered up the voucher. Number two, the voucher was unexpected. And thirdly, the salesperson proved, one, their listening skills because the guest had previously told them about being an enthusiast to off-roading. And then secondly, because they geared the voucher and discussed about how the guest could use this on the Monday morning after a long weekend of mudding to make their car look nice, that personalized the gift and made the reciprocity law really stick. The car wash voucher example offers a great illustration of how to use the reciprocity law at the beginning of a sale. However, what about the end of the sale? Can it be used then? Well, it sure can. And to go ahead and give you an example, let me tell you a true story that I used years ago when I was selling cars. Okay, maybe it wasn't years ago, it was 1992, so maybe we should say decades ago when I was selling cars. The story goes like this. I was working with this guest that had just got a job with the Illinois Department of Transportation, and it was an entry-level position. In fact, he was the person that held this sign that said slow. We've all driven by those people. Well, he happened to purchase this car during August of 92, and it was during one of those times when we were going through a heat wave that was like 98 degrees in the shade and humidity that probably matched. Well, typically, after a purchase, I'll send a thank you note out the day after. And then about a week after the purchase, I send out a postcard or a letter that asks for referrals. It says, hey, we pay referral fees, and it asks and solicits for referrals. Well, with this particular gentleman, I decided to mix things up a little bit. And what I did was I went down to the local grocery store and I bought a couple packets of Gatorade. And I put them in an envelope and I just put a little note with it that said, hey, thinking of you during this hot week. Hope you can keep cool. Something simple like that. And I went ahead and sent that off to him. Well, let me tell you, for 19 years, this person was an ambassador for our dealership, and he was my personal spokesman, bringing me more referrals than I could actually handle. In fact, later on, he still brought people in when I became a manager, and I was handing them out still to salespeople. So it's a great example of the power of reciprocity and how it can have some lasting power that can help you further down the road than maybe you had thought. Why did my Gatorade gift work so well and create so much reciprocity during the relationship with this particular guest? Well, I hit all three rules or all three key elements of the reciprocity law. Number one, I went first. I offered up the Gatorade packets. 2, it was unexpected. 3, it was personalized. That's what made it work. And that's part 1 on how to use reciprocity laws to help you in sales. And please join me next week when I jump into part 2 of how to make the reciprocity bias work for you. Next week, I'll touch on how the reciprocity bias could actually backfire and have you agreeing with an even exchange, something that you didn't even want. See you next week.